child rearing, the Millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, December 13th, 2017 day. I am Nick Pitts, and this is the Millennial Roundtable. And there's quite a few things to talk about, because in this holiday season, when we sing Silent Night, it was a not-so-silent night last night, especially down in Sweet Home, Alabama. And so today we're going to be talking about everything from the Doug Jones victory over Roy Moore. We'll be talking about this Me Too movement that continues to kind of identify some of the wrongs that are happening in the culture relative to sexual harassment. We're going to be talking about some of the Facebook founders and some of those that were on the genesis or kind of at the floor level with Facebook, talking about how it's ripping our society apart. And then we'll figure out, and then we'll start talking about the Christmas and holiday, the war on Christmas. Do people still care about saying Merry Christmas, or is Happy Holidays just sufficient? And so we've got much to talk about today, and I'm joined at the roundtable by two esteemed colleagues, the men, the myth, the legends. And joining me is Kerby Anderson, as everyone knows. Kerby, how are you today?
It's very good. And, you know, I got to tell you that it used to be in December we would be talking about Christmas carols, which is what my commentary is on today. But it's a much busier December than we've used to have in previous broadcasts here on Point of View.
That is the truth. So not only is it busy in holiday shopping center parking lots, which my hypothesis is parking lots and shopping centers are the dangerous place to be in America, because everybody's moving around, but it's also very busy and very populated within the news today. And Kerby's also joining Kerby and myself is the one and the only Brent Taylor, of pastor at First Baptist Carrollton. How are you, Brent?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
You know, I can't complain. So
it's the most wonderful time of the year.
And it just also happens to be the busiest time of year.
It is the busiest time of the year. It is all those things.
But nevertheless, let's just jump on into it, shall we? So, but before we jump into it, I need to let you guys know that we'll be taking your phone calls as well. So if you want to call in, we'll be taking some of your questions or your comments or your point of view. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And because it's the Millennial Roundtable, we'll also be taking some of your questions and comments on Facebook as well. So you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/pointofviewradio. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Kerby, last night there was a rumble down in the jungle in Alabama. Everything changed when Doug Jones defeated Roy Moore in the special election for the Senate seat that was vacated by now Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And there was just polling that at the very beginning, or polling right beforehand, was just so volatile during that time. It was, I saw one poll that had Roy Moore 9 points was going to win from over the weekend that it was tested. And then there was another poll that had Doug Jones winning by 10 points. And what ends up happening, I guess the latest numbers are 1 point something, or about 2 points right now. And what we're seeing is that there was a record historic turnout, Kerby.
Well, again, that is something that is encouraging in terms of turnout, because we certainly want people to exercise the stewardship of the vote. But again, the reason people call this, Nick and Brent, a stunner is if you look at the last few Senate contests. First of all, last time Jeff Sessions ran unopposed, okay, so you can really win pretty easily there. But the closest Senate race in Alabama was still a 19-point spread. This one, as you say, it's a spread of 1 percentage point, maybe 2 percentage points the other way. So no one, if they had looked back a couple of months ago, would have predicted this. But in light of all the controversy we've talked about here on the program and everybody else has talked about, I guess we weren't surprised. But this is amazing because, again, Donald Trump carried even the state of Alabama by 28 points. So this is the reddest of red areas. This is definitely a conservative state and a conservative area. And so, again, it is pretty significant, and we'll talk more about what that might mean in the future when you have Senator-elect Doug Jones, who is going to be a Democrat and will be voting along with the other Democrats in the Senate.
You know, I was in a store the other day, and I saw a Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree was upside down. And so obviously the base was up at the top, and the star was was actually what was holding the tree up. And I know I've seen those in years gone by, but when I saw that, it took on, I guess, more meaning, because you talk about a year that has seemed like it has been upside down. And certainly last night, when we see an election like we see in Alabama, and we see the Republicans lose an election in such a hotly contested, this was not a mayoral race. This was not a city council race. This is for the United States Senate. And when a seat is lost for the United States Senate in a state that's not just red, it is blood red. Yeah. It is very red. When you lose a seat like that, it tells you that a lot of things have changed, and the world may not be as right side up as we thought about it before.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of give an indicator, not only is there significant margins that Republicans have been winning by the past 25 years, the last time a Democrat was elected to statewide office was in 1990. And so this is just the first, it's a long time. So what is this? Was it just the accusations against Roy Moore, the 8 women that have kind of come out against him and have leveled those accusations that caused him not to be able to succeed at the election yesterday? Or was it really just, did he tie himself too closely to President Trump? And is there kind of disgruntledness within President Trump? Kirby, I think one of the more interesting things that I saw was that President Trump, based on exit polling from those that were leaving the polls yesterday, was around 48%. So in a red state like Alabama, where you would anticipate him having a higher approval rating, Trump was below 50%.
Yeah, well, that's another issue that they're going to have to deal with nationally. If you look at the exit polls, which, again, we assume that are somewhat accurate, but you've got to take this with a grain of salt. Roy Moore lost women without kids by 11 points, lost mothers by 34 points. So if indeed mothers and women are part of the vote, we'll also talk, of course, about the black vote in just a minute. But just again, back to character issues, maybe that was part of it, maybe it wasn't. But there'll be analysis that will take place for the next couple of weeks, maybe even months. But again, I might hasten to add, whenever I see one of these, there are all sorts of grandiose predictions. Now this is evidence that the Republicans are going to lose the Senate. They may, but, I don't really think one data point is enough to extrapolate too far, right?
Completely agree. Agree. And Brent, so one of the things, and we'll continue to talk about this once we get back from the break, but I'd love just your initial comments. I think one of the things that we're continuing to see is that evangelicals largely did not come out to vote. I mean, there was a point where they said 47% of the electorate in 2016 was of evangelicals. That number was down to 44%. So they estimate that around 370,000 evangelicals were missing from the polls yesterday.
I think evangelicals, we've seen in the last election over the past, really, I'd say 18, 24 months, we've seen a great divide that has happened among evangelicals. And I think that what happened in the election last night is that divide became very personal, where it's people having to make decisions about what they believe, what they want to see happen politically, but that moral ground. And I think there is I guess kind of a larger picture takeaway from last night's election is that for many, and I think many evangelicals, there is a bridge too far. Whatever that may be, there is a bridge that's too far. And I think that's become a point of contention, not just within, say, the Republican Party, and not just within evangelicals, but within the evangelical, within the actual person. I think there is a divide that's happening within people's souls.
Wow, that's fascinating. So we're going to continue to talk about the election that happened yesterday down in Alabama, and we'll be happy to take your phone calls as well. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. When we get back, we're going to continue talking about that, but also let you know that you can log on to facebook.com/pointofviewradio to find out more, as well as to leave your comments as well. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One song we often sing during the Christmas season is "What Child Is This?" William Chatterton Dix wrote the lyrics in 1865 when he was an insurance company manager and been struck by a severe illness. After a spiritual renewal in his life, he wrote a number of hymns, and this one was set to the tune of the traditional English folk song, Greensleeves. What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ the King, whose shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him laud, the babe, the son of Mary. This hymn then asks who this child is that was found by the shepherds not in a palace but in a manger. Why lies him in such a mean estate where ox and donkeys are feeding? And the next verse reminds us that Jesus is essentially born a peasant king. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him. The King of kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise a song on high, the virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the son of Mary. While shepherds must have wondered who was born in a manger, this verse reminds us that the wise men apparently believed him to be royalty and brought him gifts. Both shepherds and the wise men had access to baby Jesus because he wasn't born in a palace that would have guards and bureaucratic protocols. Isn't this a great picture for us today? All of us have access to Jesus and merely need to place our trust and faith in him. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable today by Brent Taylor, who's the pastor at First Baptist Carrollton, Texas, and also Kerby Anderson. And so we've been talking about the Alabama special election that was to replace Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And in a shocking upset, Doug Jones ends up pulling off the victory. Won 671,000 votes to Roy Moore's 650,000, and there was 22,000 write-ins, Kerby, which was just a significant number. What do you take that number to be? Is it just a distrust? Is that just a not comfortable with any of the positions?
Well, again, what you have right now is possibly you could say Jones defeated Moore by 1.5%. And the 22,000 votes are 1.7%. So if I've done my math right, of those individuals that cast a write-in had instead decided to vote for him, you would be talking about Senator-elect Roy Moore. But again, we don't know that all of them would. Now, when you have the senior senator, Richard Shelby, saying he was going to cast a write-in vote, it doesn't take long for other people to sort of figure out, well, maybe that's the way I can do it. And as I said before, people can decide who they're going to vote for and whether or not they do, but it's a good illustration that whether you vote for a third-party candidate or a write-in candidate, oftentimes in one way or another, it affects the election dramatically. The number of people, for example, that voted for, let's take on the Democratic side, Ralph Nader in 2000 in Florida, guaranteed that George W. Bush beat Al Gore and became the president. We can do this the other way as well in terms of these write-ins, and other third-party candidates probably took some votes away from Roy Moore. So that is the case. Now, is that a protest vote? For some people it is. For some people, they felt like they couldn't in good conscience vote for those individuals. But if you want to understand this election, look at the women vote, look at the black vote, which we haven't talked about yet, and look at the write-in vote. And any one of those three could have elected Roy Moore. And in each particular case, it allowed Doug Jones to be elected as the next senator from Alabama.
Is it safe to say that Nick Saban came in third place?
Man, I did see where he got a vote, which I mean, he's a miracle worker. If he's able to pull off Alabama to be able to get in the college football playoff,
Nick Saban, there you
that's
go.
something else. But yeah, it does.
Roll Tide.
It's very interesting, Kerby. You've mentioned it a couple of times. There's been much that has been made about the African American vote that came out. In droves, significant droves, as compared to in 2016 when there was almost like they did not come out as well as they did. I think one number I saw was 31% potentially. What do you attest that to? Do you think it was just kind of some of the comments that Roy Moore made kind of leading up to the election? Or was it just a kind of we really do believe in? I mean, Doug Jones has got a stellar civil rights record.
He does.
He was a U.S. Attorney General. He
prosecuted two Ku Klux Klan individuals. Yes.
So he really was.
Yeah.
He was. What do you think it was?
Well, first of all, again, most Democratic candidates, especially even in Alabama, but nationwide, tend to win almost 90% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few exceptions to that, but that's the point. They're the exceptions. Now, if you go to the Hill, which is kind of the record for Capitol Hill, they say the campaign, that is the Jones campaign, conducted a carefully orchestrated push to maximize black turnout in the final days. And again, Jones spent the weekend with Senator Cory Booker, Representative Terry Sewell, and others really going to a lot of the black churches. And then there are all the technological things that are happening. We call it the ground game, which I guess is what used to be, where people are on the ground talking and knocking on doors. But now a lot of that's done by phone and by identifying particular groups that are most likely to vote for your candidate. And so in some respects, it is very clear that the Democrats did a much better job of that than the Republicans, in part because the support for Roy Moore by the RNC was on again, off again.
Yeah.
So that was part of it as well. But it isn't so much who you say you're going to vote for, it's who shows up that day to vote. So that's certainly one case where you could see that the black vote was very significant. So if you look at either the black vote, the women vote, or the write-in vote, any one of those three, if they went the other way, Roy Moore might be the senator, but all of them went the other way, and that's why we have Doug Jones as the senator-elect.
Yeah, there was just a resounding vote. Brent, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting. You were talking about those three different categories, and obviously with what's happened in our culture, the Me Too movement, the issues related to sexual harassment, that has galvanized, called together many women, especially, to come and to make their voices heard. What will be interesting, I think, to watch is what happens in the African American community, because they have the opportunity now to say, we made a difference in an election. We turned the tide in an election, because most analysis does point to the fact that when the African American community turned out to vote, it made a significant difference in the outcome of this election. And I think they will have a voice to say, we want things done. We want some things handled differently, and our voice will be heard. I think it's given a momentum to that, which will be interesting to watch when we come to 2018.
Yeah, I think about the last time, the significance of the African American vote outside of President Obama being elected in 2008 and then again reelected in 2012. Kerby, it goes back to your home state in California. When California was trying to decide whether they were going to be a state where that would kind of allow same-sex marriage to move, it was that African-American church-going vote that really did swing the tide. I believe it was on Proposition 8.
Mm-hmm,
was it Proposition 8 or 9?
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're starting to see that African-Americans just collectively came together, and not only did they just say they were going to vote, but they actually went and voted, which I think is an important delineation that you made.
Well, again, the point that Brent made is, again, they're going to want certainly Doug Jones to do some things, but let's now move ahead to when he becomes the senator. He will be the junior senator from Alabama. He will be the rookie. He will be the one with the least seniority. And even though, as you pointed out, Nick, in your piece that came out today on the Daily Briefing, that, Doug Jones goes to church and he wants to treat people the way he thinks Jesus would treat them, the bottom line is he's going to be told by the Democratic leader that indeed he's going to vote with the other Democrats. And I will predict that even if he finds that they say the tax reform bill that comes back from a conference committee is something that would be helpful to Alabama, he will be told by Chuck Schumer that he will be one of those 49 votes against that. And so a lot of people sometimes, Nick and Brent, say, well, I vote for the person rather than the party. And I really agree with that. Mm-hmm. But you also have to pay attention to the party. And if you can find me a Democrat that was allowed to stray from the fold this last year, I can't find it. You know, when Chuck Schumer says 48 are going to vote against whatever it is, the Affordable Care Act, a repeal and replace, whether it's tax reform, that's how they vote. You might say, well, that's on the other side. Was it really? Can I mention people like John McCain, Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham? We can go down a long list, can't we? And by the way, even as a junior senator, he will not even be allowed to criticize the leadership. Again, find me somebody in the Democratic Party that's criticized the leadership. Maybe Senator Manchin, but probably not. Do we have that in the Republican Party? Oh, does the name Ben Sass ring a bell? You know, this guy has only been in the Senate for a few months, and he can say. So it just shows you the difference in the way the parties actually go about some of this legislation.
Or even here, like, so we're based out here in Dallas, Texas, and so very much keen. Like, so there's a kind of a tradition within the Senate from everything that I've read is that the junior senator, whenever you're first elected, you kind of stay quiet that first year on the floor. And I remember when Ted Cruz was first brought into the Senate. I mean, Ted Cruz was anything but silent.
He was not the quiet boy.
He was full of energy and ready to make some changes. But I think Kerby brings up a great point, Brent. What we saw with Chuck Schumer through this new session of Congress is that he has an ability to bring individuals and hold that coalition together in a way that what we haven't seen with Mitch McConnell right now. And do you think there's value in that of being a consolidated vote? Give me your take on that.
Well, I think you obviously, as you elect individuals, you want those individuals to go and represent your values, the things you're passionate about. But it's a team. It's teams, and there's no one congressman that controls everything. There's no one senator that controls everything, and so they're part of a party, and that party has the ability to sway votes and to sway direction. And I think there's a healthy aspect to that sometimes, but obviously there's an aspect of that is troubling. And so as we look into who we vote for, the candidates that we put up for election, it is imperative that we choose people that hold our values, that proclaim our values, but we also have to recognize that they're not going into always a friendly environment. It's going to be a difficult process for them.
It will be. And so we're going to continue talking about the election that happened in Alabama yesterday. And we're also going to open up the phone lines for you. We've got a couple of calls that we'll take after this break. And so we want to make those phone number aware for you. If you'd like to call in to Point of View, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And because it's the Millennial Roundtable and I'm behind the mic, we're going to open up Facebook as well. And so we're going to be reading from your Facebook comments and some of the questions that you might have. And you can log on to facebook.com/pointofviewradio to leave some of your comments or your questions that you might have. I'm really anxious to be able to see what's been posted on Facebook just because I know that among millennials, that's a really big source of information as well. And so when we get back, we're going to continue talking about the election in Alabama, as well as really interested in kind of the evangelical vote and the split thereof. And so we'll be back right after this.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Hey, and welcome back to Point of View. This is Nick Pitts on the Millennial Roundtable of this December 13th, 2017 day for Point of View Radio. And I'm joined at the roundtable by Brent Taylor, pastor of First Baptist Church in Carrollton, Texas, as well as Kerby Anderson. And during the first half hour, we've been talking about the special election down in Alabama, where in a stunning upset, Doug Jones, the Democrat, is the first statewide elected official that's a Democrat that was elected to office since 1990 in Alabama, defeating Roy Moore. And so there was much that's been made, and we've been talking about everything from just the significance of individuals that were willing to put aside their Christmas shopping to show up at the polls on this special election, which traditionally lends itself towards a deflated vote, but really that was quite the opposite. There was an uptick in voting. And then you've also got the rise in the African-American vote, and then evangelicals largely just did not show up to voting. Some estimates have that 370,000 based on exit polling did not show up as compared to 2016. Well, you can't necessarily, that's kind of apples to oranges just because that's a presidential election, and there's always going to be more people that show up for a presidential election than a special election. But nevertheless, there was a vote that was taking place, and Doug Jones is now the winner. And so we're going to be taking your phone calls during the show today. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And we'll also be reading some of your comments from Facebook. So be sure to go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you can leave a comment. We've got a live stream of what's happening right now in studio. So we've had to tell Brent to behave. Brent, please behave.
I'll do my best, I promise.
Okay, and so we're going to take some phone calls now. And so we're going to go out to Lance in Texas. Lance, are you there?
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. I would just like to speak up for the 3,000 babies that cannot speak for themselves that will be murdered today by their mothers. And Roy Moore would have spoken up for them and defended them. Doug Jones will not. And the Christians that stayed home could have spoken for those 3,000 children, but they decided that they were going to vote for not a sinner, Roy Moore, but they were going to vote for a write-in candidate who's not a sinner, who has not fallen short of the glory of God. I hope you realize my sarcasm there. Mm-hmm. We're all sinners, and I think it's very sad when 3,000 children, and that's a fact, are murdered by their mothers every day. And somebody was going to stand up for those people, those 3,000 children, who, by the way, cannot talk for themselves. And one last thing, I'm really frightened by the statistics of women who decided not to vote for Roy Moore. That says a lot about our churches and how they don't preach about what women believe, Christian women who are in favor of abortion. They might not say they are, but they'll vote that way. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Hey, Lance, thank you so much for your comment. Kerby, he was bringing up, he was channeling some kind of biblical imagery and biblical language, being a voice for the voiceless, as we know from Proverbs 31:8-9, this idea of standing up for those that can't stand up for themselves, really being an advocate, as Jesus is sitting at the right hand of the Father, advocating for us right now. And Lance was really channeling kind of something that's been very prevalent within evangelical circles relative to electoral politics, which is this idea that really is this one issue, abortion, is enough to be able to disqualify an individual from getting the vote of an evangelical.
That's what I've said before. Again, the scriptures talk about rescuing the perishing, and there are those that perish. The sad reality is as he was trying to point out, is sometimes in the churches we don't speak to this issue. And I understand that pastors don't want to address the issue of abortion every single Sunday. But certainly when you have the opportunity in January to have a Sanctity of Life Sunday to address that issue, to remind people that in your congregation, who probably some of whom have had abortions, first of all, that God's forgiveness extends to them, and post-abortive women certainly need care and compassion, but at the same time to stand for life. And we sometimes just avoid that. And so then we wonder why we then have individuals who say, well, I'm pro-life, but then they vote to put people in office that aren't pro-life. And we also, of course, in this particular case, are talking about a United States senator that will be able to give an up or down vote to a Supreme Court justice that may or may not be pro-life. And so there are some real consequences to this election.
I think a lot of people, evangelicals, have grown callous to the issue of to pro-life issues. Obviously, the caller, you can hear the passion in his voice about this issue, but I think that many many Christians feel like, well, that's an issue we're not going to be able to turn around, so we're just going to move on, and we're going to deal with other issues. And so whether it's the pocketbook, whether it's taxes, whatever, healthcare, whatever the issue may be, you just don't hear that topic as much as we used to in days gone by. And I think that's largely because evangelicals have accepted,
yes,
this is where we are, this is the state of our country, and this is what's going to happen, and it's not going to change. And so that callousness translates into an issue that is a side issue. It's not a primary issue in their lives, and that's a real concern.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and I'd be really interested to hear y'all's comments. I think it's very important for us to understand that there are individuals that there are one issue, and that's the supreme issue. And I think that's within their right, like the ability to be able to want to make sure that I'm voting for a candidate because I know I will be morally culpable for the everything that I do. If I believe it to be true, that I'm going to stand before the throne of God and I'm going to be judged for all my actions and inactions. I think that's something that we do need to take into account. But here's the thing that I'm particularly interested in. I'd be interested in your comments and maybe even your criticism. I think one issue can disqualify someone, but just because they agree with you on one issue doesn't necessarily mean they qualify for the office. Am I right or am I wrong?
And I said that the other day, so I'll say it again because I think being pro-life is good, but being pro-choice is a disqualification. I mean, I think you are disqualified from office and should be disqualified for office for being pro-abortion. But just because you're pro-life doesn't necessarily mean it's a qualification. It's a first step, and there are certainly other issues. And for somebody, and I'm the old guy around the table, that's looked at voter guides time and time again, I'll tell you, if you're wrong on the issue of life, you're usually wrong on a lot of other issues. And I've looked at a lot of voters' guides over the years, and Kelly Shackelford's probably looked at even more than I have, and we'll all kind of agree that oftentimes if you're right on that issue, you'll be right on a lot of others. But if you're wrong on that issue, you're usually wrong on all sorts of issues. So life is an important one, but it is certainly not being pro-life is a disqualification. Being pro-life isn't necessarily a qualification.
And that is one of the things that churches are dealing with, I think Christians are dealing with, because I saw a statistic that talked about the voters yesterday, the voters in Alabama, that 88% of Republican voters identify themselves as a Christian. 81% of the Democrats who voted identify themselves as Christian. And so where that term, what being a Christian means, is getting thrown around in a lot of different ways, just like the word evangelical is. If Democrats were to change their stance slightly to where they didn't kick people out who were pro-life, then I think that would see a major shift, because there are many people who struggle with issues maybe that the Republican Party supports, but that issue of life is such a dominating issue that for them, I'm not going to back off on this topic. And so it is an interesting time of analysis, even for the Democratic Party, as they're looking at what they have learned from the election, and can they keep that seat? Can they hold that seat? Or is it just is this just a flash in the pan until the next real election?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you can take away from this. Because, again, what's shocking to me, it's not just that Doug Jones is pro-choice. It's that it's almost like he celebrates abortion, which is just so shocking to me.
Even partial birth abortion, he sort of backed off from that. But when he was first asked about that, that's third trimester abortions.
It is shocking how much he is just like his position on abortion. And what would it look like, especially kind of moving towards your comments, Brent, what would it look like if Tom Perez and the Democratic National Committee chairman decided that I wasn't going to be nearly as antagonistic and more welcoming towards pro-life Democrats? What would that look like if we saw a resurgence of these blue dog Democrats, of this Democratic Leadership Council that we saw in the 90s and early 2000s?
And that's the problem we have in politics right now, is that everything is so not just divided, but it is far to the extremes. Everybody's got to be far to the extremes. And as even among believers, if you don't believe exactly the way that I believe, if you don't see the world exactly the way, it's not a matter of, well, we have a difference of opinion. It is, you are a heretic and should be burned at the stake.
Like,
We've got to get over that.
I can't even just be right. I have to make sure that you are wrong and feel destroyed now by my mic drop that I put on your lifeless body. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we're moving and living in this world. And so we're going to continue to explore this, and we'll take some of your phone calls because I really need to get to some of your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212, or you can leave a comment on our Facebook page at Point of View, or facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It was Friday night, and the lights in Texas shone down on the field. The Coons High School football team was about to smash through a banner and onto the field. Holding the banner were the Coons High School cheerleaders. Negative slogans like "Beat the Bulldogs" were a thing of the past. These cheerleaders wanted to be positive, so they looked to the Bible for a positive message they could communicate instead. But the school said the new banner message had to go. They had received a complaint and could not afford to take any chances. But the cheerleaders were not about to give up. First Liberty Institute stepped in and for the next 5 years represented the young women. The school argued that since the banner was on school property, the message, chosen entirely by the students and displayed on paper the students purchased and painted, was government speech, and that couldn't be religious without violating the Constitution. The court disagreed. No reasonable person would conclude that the message, scrawled in student script and held aloft by students, could be an official message of the state. Instead, the students' message was private speech, entitled to the protections of the First Amendment. Matthews v. Coons Independent School District stands for the important principle that schools cannot censor, ban, or claim ownership to the private religious speech of its students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View for this December 13th, 2017 day. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the round table today by Kerby Anderson and Brent Taylor. And so the phone lines have been going, and so we are going to start taking some of those phone calls. And so we'll jump over to Sylvia in New York. Sylvia, are you there?
Yeah, I'm up here in the wild, woolly, snowy state of New York.
Hey, I hope you're given some time to go sledding.
Well, where we are, we don't have much snow, but up north by the lakes, they've gotten hit.
Okay. Well,
anyway, I have been listening to you guys for well over a year now. Every afternoon, I'm a quilter, so I enjoy listening. And I've met Kerby a couple times, but I've never called a national radio show before. But I just had to comment that you guys need to kind of look at God's hand in this thing. When God closes a door, He opens another door that's better. And I'm not saying that Moore wouldn't have been a good fellow in the Congress, but we could have opened a big can of worms had he won. Another hearing and all this other nonsense to knock him out. And God's hand is in this thing somewhere, and I think the guys need to consider that. So whether we don't know what the door might be, but God's hand has never stopped. So, winning or losing, his hand still counts. Yeah. So maybe you guys can comment on that.
I completely agree, Sylvia. I mean, being the Advent season, one can't help but be reminded of Isaiah 9 and how for unto us a child is born and the government will rest upon his shoulders. The reality that, yes, we are electing our leaders, but we have a God that has selected those individuals, and not only has he selected those individuals or allowed those individuals to rule, but he also recognizes that he has power over them. I'm reminded of Proverbs 22:1, that the king's heart is like a channel of water in our King of Kings' hand. That God is always in control, regardless of whoever's in the Oval Office or whoever's in these political offices as well, right?
Yeah, man, I'd use the book of Daniel as well, because there Nebuchadnezzar is kind of believing his press clippings, and here we say the Most High, that is Yahweh, controls who will be in office. And so, again, we need to remember God's hand. We need to recognize God's sovereignty, and at the same time recognize that even this election, even though it caught some of us off guard, didn't catch God off guard, right?
And from you guys have taken the biblical approach, as the caller was talking about. Just from a political approach, I think that Republicans are going to learn from this process that we have to put up candidates that have integrity, that have character. Everybody is flawed, but there are when you have issues like this that have been such big issues that have dominated the news, it's going to impact people's votes, and people will respond.
Let me pick up on that, because that's one of those application items, because sometimes when we have these stories, I say, well, what can we learn from it? One is that we need to pay attention right now who's running for these primaries, because we're going to have what's called an off-year election. Now, this Monday in the state of Texas, that was the deadline for filing. So in the state of Texas and in many other states, we now know who is actually filed in the primaries. And when you go out and vote in the primary, because so few people vote, your vote, it's almost like your vote counts 10 times as much as it does during a presidential election. If you go and vote in a primary in an off-year election, there are so few people that vote, you have a disproportionate influence. So this is the time for you right after Christmas. You can wait till after Christmas, but then start figuring out who the candidates are, because as we just learned here, there were two primary candidates. Many people believe that the other primary candidate might have won. As a matter of fact, I think there's pretty good evidence, no matter whether you like Roy Moore or not, there's probably pretty good evidence that Mr. Strange probably would have won. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I think the lesson we can learn here is that one's in the rearview mirror, but look out your windshield and ask yourself, who's running right now for state legislature, who's running for Congress, and who is running in the 34 senatorial races that are coming up. Pay attention now, get behind those candidates, vote for those candidates, financially support those candidates, because having a good candidate in the primary is going to be a greater opportunity for that individual to be elected in the fall.
You're right, Kerby. Soren Kierkegaard said that we understand life looking backwards, but we live life looking forwards. And if we look backwards far enough, what we're going to continue to see is that the Democrats are learning. They ran John Ossoff in Georgia, and that they recognized some of the errors. And what they've done is they've capitalized and improved on that special election in early 2017, and Republicans are seeing that specifically in Virginia, New Jersey, and now they're seeing that in Alabama as well. And so, what will 2018 hold? Well, you're right. Since World War II, the party out of power, loses average seats. 25 seats. Yeah. On average, they lose 25 seats. Now, the Republicans are set up, and it's very advantageous for them in this 2018 election, just by luck of the chance. But what you need to recognize is, on average, the party in power loses 25 seats. And so it'll be increasingly interesting in this next election, especially when we see some of these state houses and these local elections, what it will look like voter turnout and what it will look like, and to see if Republicans can get in. We're going to continue taking some of your phone calls. And so we'll run over to Georgia right now. Marie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing?
Doing well, Marie. How are you?
Good. I'm really good. I have a comment and a question. This last national election was the most grievous to my spirit that I have ever participated in. I'm 63, and I've been voting since I was 18 years old in local and national elections. And I have never, I don't think once considered not voting except this time. The two candidates that were left standing were, in my opinion, the worst choices that we could have been left with. And it brought about this question: why is it that we as Christians, devout followers of Jesus Christ, allow the world to give us their choices, and then we try to reconcile them within our biblical principles and values? For the life of me, I do not understand it, and I don't understand why we keep doing it. Now is the time for us to start praying about, fasting, or whatever we need to do for God to give us better choices. It doesn't make sense to me. We let the world give us their choices, and then we try to fit them in. What ended up happening with me this time is, instead of voting for someone, I voted against someone. Mm-hmm. I never want to have to do that again.
I want to say that I'm going to vote for you in 2020, so get your election campaign together. I joke when I say that, but I also would say, too, that this is one of the problems that we have is that so many Christians are not willing to run, and that's because of the culture that we have today, this culture that is so vicious, that attacks people, that goes after personal character, that attacks the family of the candidate, and that makes people frightened to run. But this is the time that we need men and women of courage to stand up and to demonstrate faith, and believers have the opportunity to speak up and speak out through that vote. And I have to say, our system is flawed, but I'll take this system over any other system in the world today.
I wish we had more time, but we're coming to a break. But let me just say, I'm a precinct chairman. As a matter of fact, if you were in my precinct, you could vote for me in this coming election, because I've already filed. But I'll tell you, we have a precinct meeting. Sometimes I'm the only person there. Sometimes I go with other precinct people, and there's a handful of individuals. If just pastors would encourage just one person in each church to show up at a precinct meeting or show up at an election rally, Christians really would make a difference. I mean, we just, again, stay home, and we just wait for every 4 years and then complain about the choices we have. So Marie's right. Let's have us determine some of those choices rather than have the world determine some of those choices.
Yeah, you think about some of the biblical characters. You have Esther, you have Joseph, you have Esther, Joseph, you have Daniel. The list goes on and on of individuals that have felt the call of God to exercise their influence within these circles and spheres of power in politics. And who's to say, if it's the body of Christ and not everyone sharing the same part, who's to say that some are being disobedient and not heeding the call of God to go into the political world? And so we're going to continue talking about all of this and more after we get back, right after this.
Vote.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed. thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think you guys, y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this Wednesday, December 13, 2017 day. This is Wednesday's Millennial Roundtable here on Point of View, and I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Brent Taylor. Brent is the pastor at First Baptist Church of Carrollton, Texas, as well as Kerby Anderson, the man, the myth, the legend of Point of View Radio, and we are so excited that you decided to join us today. During the first hour, if you were tuning in, we talked about everything that was happening down in Sweet Home, Alabama. Though we're singing Silent Night, it was anything but a silent night in Alabama, with Doug Jones pulling off the upset over Roy Moore, winning by about 2 points at the polls. The Democrat pulling out, being the first Democrat to win statewide elected office since 1990. And we've been taking some phone calls on that. There's been so much to talk about, Kerby, just because there's so many little subplots to what happened last night. Everything from the uptick in the African-American support at the polls to the downtick to upwards of 370,000 evangelicals based on, again, speculative exit polls that just didn't show up at the event, to the number of write-in candidates, 22,000 write-in candidates. There's so many little subplots to this little mystery that was a special election.
And again, the application that we talked about, Marie, who called in the first hour, if you happen to be listening, was talking about the choices we've had in the past. And if you don't like the choices, get involved in the primaries. And as I pointed out, I'll just use Texas as an example. The deadline for those who would file as candidates was Monday at 6 o'clock, and that was it. And for most of the other states, that's the case. So there are a few others that have deadlines a little bit later. So if you don't know now, you will know shortly who you can vote for in the primary, and pay attention to that. Don't complain in the general election about the choices you have, because sometimes you have much better choices in the primary, so get involved. And so show up at your precinct meeting. Those of us, I'm a precinct chairman, would appreciate some of you to show up there and show up to work for a candidate. It doesn't take a lot of time and effort. And most importantly, since we're talking about millennials here, you need to register to vote. We have more millennials that are registered with Facebook than are registered with their local election.
And so, yeah, later on during the show, we'll talk about that thing called Facebook. I think it's actually going to catch on, Brent. I think there's around 2 billion people that have signed up for Facebook.
There's a future for it. What do you think?
And I don't even know. I stopped counting how many Brent Taylor fan pages there are, actually. There's just so many people.
I really don't know. I spend most of my time on MySpace, and so I'm not really sure.
Well, we'll eventually get you back up to the early 1990s, but nevertheless, we've been taking your phone calls, as I've been trying to answer some of your comments as well on the Facebook page, and so we want to make those available to you because we'll be answering some of those questions as well as sharing some of your comments. Or you can call in today's show at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And so when you log on there, you have an opportunity to unfortunately see me and fortunately see Brent, and not just other pictures from his fan pages on Facebook, and see us as we broadcast this show live on our Facebook page, as well as leave a comment. And when you leave a comment, what we're going to try to do underneath the live video is be answering those and share some of those comments during the show today. But we're going to jump back over to the phone calls. And so we've got Leslie from California that called in. Leslie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Leslie, what is your point of view?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm calling in response to the lady who spoke earlier about the culture throwing us all the choices that we have, to vote for. And I believe Judge Roy Moore is a Christian man who has run for office so that he can make a difference, a very good difference, and that the allegations of sexual misconduct were nothing more than obviously they were attacks from the liberal left. And apparently they were very convincing because he did not win. But he has a long record of being a Christian man. He fought for the right to have the Ten Commandments hanging on the courtroom wall. His wife, even his wife, has come out many times in support of him. And I think it's just tragic, that something like this could happen. He's very much needed in office, and I don't understand the woman's point of view on that. But thank you for hearing my comment.
Hey, Leslie, thank you so much for calling in all the way from California. And, that is kind of the kind of tension that many find themselves in right now. Roy Moore, before everything that happened during this 2017 special election, very much was known for his strident and very strong Christian stances about everything from putting in 10 Commandments in front of the Alabama Supreme Court to just some of the comments that he's made, as well as just the book that he came out with that kind of was given kind of within the founding. I can't remember the exact title. So there very much was rhetoric as well as some actions that he did that demonstrated some Christian commitment. But then probably about a month and a half ago, the women started coming out. Washington Post ran a story that documented that at that point, 6 women came out in that Washington Post investigation that demonstrated that he had kind of relations with them that was inappropriate in nature. Everywhere from 14 years old was some of the youngest. And so that caused some speculation, especially since it was substantiated by upwards of 30 people that did that. And then now that number stands at about 8 right now. And so there is just this kind of conflict that what we saw within the demographic of the populace. Do we believe some of those accusations that seem to be well-founded that he really didn't provide answers to, or should we look back at his past character and some of those actions that he's done relative to the 10 Commandments, relative to some of the comments that he's made? And it really, Brent, again, I'm just making a speculation here. I don't have the hard numbers to prove it. But what we do know from the hard number standpoint specifically is around 370,000 evangelicals did not show up as compared to what happened during the presidential election in 2016.
Well, that is the divide. That's the great divide that is happening between that people are having within themselves, because you find a candidate that has stood for values that you value, that you appreciate. There's a history there. And so that history makes you look back and say, I'd like that candidate to be the person representing me in Congress. Then you have these allegations. These allegations are made, and again, there was no trial that has taken place. It is a trial in the public square, so to speak, and through the media. Part of the problem, too, is that trial takes place not only in the media, but it takes place at a time when just about every aspect of society, there are allegations being made against people in politics, people in the media, going back with Harvey Weinstein kind of being the beginning of that avalanche, in sports, in television. We're seeing it in so many different areas that it all becomes part of this wave, this tidal wave that happens. And so I think a lot of Christians were trying to wrestle in their life as to what they want as a values voter and how that lines up with a candidate that is being accused of some pretty serious allegations that are being made.
Yeah, you think about it. So if that number is correct, that 370,000 evangelicals didn't show up, and then the number, which is correct, 22,000 write-in votes. Looking at the numbers, Roy Moore only lost the election by 21,000 votes.
Right.
21,000 votes. So that's more than enough because, again, evangelicals, according to poll numbers, exit polls, 80% of evangelicals, much like 81% with Donald Trump in 2016, 80% of evangelicals supported Roy Moore during the election. And just imagine if 80% of those 370,000 people showed up. Just imagine if some of that 22,000 were evangelical in nature. So we're going to continue talking about Roy Moore when we come back after this, but be sure to call in or leave a comment on Facebook, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One song we often sing during the Christmas season is "What Child Is This?" William Chatterton Dix wrote the lyrics in 1865 when he was an insurance company manager and been struck by a severe illness. After a spiritual renewal in his life, he wrote a number of hymns, and this one was set to the tune of the traditional English folk song Greensleeves. What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch are keeping? This is Christ the King, whose shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him laud, the babe, the son of Mary. This hymn then asks who this child is that was found by the shepherds not in a palace but in a manger. Why lies him in such a mean estate where ox and donkeys are feeding? And the next verse reminds us that Jesus is essentially born a peasant king. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him. The King of Kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise a song on high, the Virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the son of Mary. While shepherds must have wondered who was born in a manger, this verse reminds us that the wise men apparently believed him to be royalty and brought him gifts. Both shepherds and the wise men had access to baby Jesus because he wasn't born in a palace that would have guards and bureaucratic protocols. Isn't this a great picture for us today? All of us have access to Jesus and merely need to place our trust and faith in him. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable today on this December 13th day by Kerby Anderson and Brent Taylor. And so during the first part of this hour, as well as the last hour, we were talking about the election in Alabama that Doug Jones pulled off the upset victory by 1.5 points, and really an electorate kind of specifically in Alabama, where it's been very much a deep red state. Like, I think Jeff Sessions, the closest that he won was by 19 points. And so what we continue to see is the divisiveness nature. And so I don't think we'll talk about the Moore election anymore, if that's okay. No more? What are you thinking? What are you thinking, Brent?
I'm thinking you're trying to keep up with the Joneses.
There it is. Okay, and so we'll transition topics, and we'll so if you want to jump on our website, there's an interesting comments that were made by some of the founders of Facebook, as well as those that were kind of on the genesis floor of Facebook, that were talking about the divisiveness of Facebook and the dopamine-driven feedback. And so you can go onto the Point of View website to see that article, pointofview.net, or you can log on to the Facebook page as well, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, to see some of that as well. And so kind of our second article of the day is the former Facebook VP says social media is destroying society, which is just fascinating. Here was one of the quotes that this former VP said: "The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we've created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. And it's not an American problem. This is not about Russian ads. This is a global problem." What was so significant is that this came out, and not only did this come out yesterday, 2 days ago, but But what we saw is that's echoing what the former president of Facebook said, which was Sean Parker. In his interview that he had with Axios Media, Sean Parker says, quote, "We needed to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while relative to Facebook, every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or post, whatever. It's a social validation feedback. You're exploiting a vulnerability in the human psychology." So what we're seeing is that Facebook really is doing something to the human persona, and it really is dividing us. And I think maybe one of the evidences was what happened in Alabama. And Brent, what do you think?
I think that Facebook is, like any social media, is something that has become addictive. That is, one of the main addictions we have in our culture today. I saw recently where a study that said 92% of teenagers go online daily, and people wake up in the middle of the night to check their status. I have people say, "Hey, I saw that did you see my post?" "Yes, I saw it." "Well, you didn't like it." And so it's become a validating tool for people to say, not only to find information about what's going on in the world, but to express themselves. But I think more than just expressing themselves, it's this desire to be liked, to be recognized, to be noticed. And I think that's feeding within the mind of people this idea that I've got to be online in order for it to be real. The old, if it's not on Facebook, did it really happen?
Picker didn't happen, right, Kerby?
Well, and this is one of those interesting situations where, again, we're doing the Millennial Roundtable. We've got some millennials around the table, and I want to hear from some of them listening, because if you've grown up where this is all you know, then this becomes your new reality. And as Gene Twinge says, the younger generation, those who are younger than the two of you, in the so-called iGen generation, they've never experienced a time where we don't have smartphones and Facebook and Twitter and those kinds of things. So in some respects, that does become their reality. But let's go back and talk about what had existed before, because let me quote from J. Nicholas Pitts, who points out that there used to be a time when people who would comment were validated. They were credentialed. They were journalists. They were academicians. There were individuals who were speaking in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, even into the 90s, and they had a justification for doing so. They had academic credentials. They had experience. Now, anybody can be making a comment on Facebook or Twitter, whether they have the facts at their hand or not, whether they deserve a hearing or not. And that, in some respects, creates a situation where the most polarized comments are the ones that get most often quoted. And so if we want to understand some of the polarization of our society, part of that has to do with social media, don't you think?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is, and so for those of you that are tuning in on Facebook, hi there. So I think one of the fascinating things that you're seeing on Facebook right now is that we are increasingly utilizing it and increasingly finding our value in it. I think the numbers are very clear. And what's shocking based on a Pew poll is that among millennials, the average millennial will be on social media for 6 hours and 19 minutes a week. Whereas if you look at a boomer generation, that number is 6 hours and 29 minutes. So boomers are actually spending more time than millennials on Facebook. My working hypothesis is, and this, Brent, I'm going to look for you on this, even though you're a Gen Xer, is that boomers are looking on Facebook for 6 hours and 19 minutes to see what their kids are doing.
Yes, or grandkids. Grandkids pictures
on Facebook. And
or they're retired and they have a lot more free time.
Yeah. I think about my grandfather post pictures of him on a golf course all the time. So it's just putting a jab in my eye about, well, you're on a golf course again. There it is. But nevertheless, and I'm stuck here behind the desk, and I'm not bitter, I promise. But I think that's one of the fascinating things. It's almost like you were talking about, Brent, like you're very much your social value. The hierarchy is based upon the number of likes you have, number of comments, and then everybody's given a phone, right? Everybody's giving access a microphone to be able to share their opinions. And back to Kerby's point, maybe, call me crazy, maybe your voice doesn't need to be that big based upon some of your credentials or expertise.
Well, that's a very rude comment that you're making there, and I'm not going to like that on Facebook. But the people today, there's a lot of since this is the Millennial Roundtable, there's a lot of criticism of the younger generation. They're always on their phone, they're always on social media, they're always looking at their phone, making comments. Friends, I got to tell you something. Look around.
Yeah,
it's not any different. I don't think. I know there is a statistical difference. But I'm telling you, you look across a restaurant, it's not just the teenagers that are on their phone.
Sure.
And when it comes to Facebook, a lot of people will say, I'm on Facebook because I want to see what my kids are doing. Your kids aren't on Facebook anymore. I mean, the younger generation, they've moved on. They're on other forms of social media. They're on Snapchat and other things like that.
Instagram, etc.
Right. And so Facebook has become a forum, though, by which people can express their point of view. They can express themselves. They can express their political ideology. But I think as believers, we have to understand that if we're going to sing praises to the Lord on Sunday, and then we're going to walk out and show anger, bitterness, hatred throughout the week, Monday through Friday, or Sunday at noon until the following Sunday at 9 a.m., that does not send the right message. We are witnesses, and that calling to be his witnesses and his ambassadors is not limited to our real life. It is all of our life, and social media is part of that. So be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little hands, what you do. And be careful, little fingers, what you type when it comes to social media, because we are Christ's ambassadors in cyberspace as well as in our real life.
So I'll look around once I get through looking at this timeline. But nevertheless, I think I think that is interesting. And I mean, if I'll make this a confession booth here in the studio right now. I will tell you that there have been individuals that I've made it a rule now not to look at social media past a certain hour at night, because I know that I just a recent example is I was scrolling through Facebook. I saw what one of my old high school friends said. And I haven't talked to this person in years, but somehow they made me bitter in my heart. Like, it was just, I was so frustrated by what they said. And I can't believe somebody has the propensity to do that to me, which revealed my own dependence upon that very thing. And again, it points back to the article, Kerby. Like, Facebook is doing something to us. Social media is doing something to us. And it's not necessarily shun it completely, but you do need to redeem it in some form or fashion.
Again, we've talked about the book, The Shallows. I can bring it in during the break if we want. And it's talking about what the internet is doing to us. And here, I'm not going to say his name because it's hard to pronounce, but nevertheless, this is an individual that's an executive that in some respects feels a little bit of guilt. And I saw the interview where he was saying, we sort of just kind of felt that maybe in the deep recesses of our mind this was a problem, but we didn't really deal with that. And, of course, now we are dealing with it. And I don't think we should necessarily blame individuals because every technology has positives. Yep. Twitter is one where people tell us some of the worst things in the world and say some of the awful things. The president right now enjoys the fact that he can actually speak directly to the people and not have to go through the network. So there are all sorts of examples that I can point to of people that have become Christians and have grown in their Christian life because of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all sorts of things. So the technology needs to be used wisely, but the sad reality is, as you said, it's a dopamine-driven feedback. And it's an opportunity where anybody can say anything, and sometimes it would be better if they did not.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that we need to do, and you've done it, is not necessarily blame Facebook, because this is more user error, right?
It's
according to James 4:1, what are the
sources
sources of quarrels and conflicts among you? Are they not your own desires? This is a user error. So how do we utilize Facebook in a way that's profitable, that's beneficial, and that's equitable for all of us? And so we'll be talking about that when we get back from the break. And be sure to log on to Facebook and leave a comment or call in. We'll be back right after this.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this December 13, 2017 day. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Brent Taylor, who is the pastor of First Baptist Carrollton Church at the Fields here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and also Kerby Anderson. And so we have been talking about technology, but specifically social media and what social media is doing to the human experience. There have been a former VP, as well as Axios entered Sean Parker, who was the former president at Facebook, and they talked about the dopamine hits and how really Facebook is feeding our mind to make us crave what it offers us, but also how it's making us more divided among one another. You can find that website, you can find that article on our website at pointofview.net, and we'll be taking your phone calls as well. What do you think about Facebook? How do you limit Facebook? How do you control Facebook so that you're not mastered by Facebook? You can call in, and we'd love to hear from you at 800-351-1212, or an ironic twist, you can go on Facebook. And I realize, I promise I'm not trying to be a hypocrite by saying, and again, I think this is the important delineation, Kerby, that we were talking about.
That's right.
We're not saying to completely trash Facebook.
No.
We're not saying to completely get rid of technology, though we are telling Brent to trim down some of those fan pages that he's got on Facebook. But we're just saying just to be moderate your usage of anything. Like, you don't want it. All things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. So Facebook's permissible, but not utilizing it all the time is beneficial. And so you can log on and leave your comment on our Facebook page as well at Point of View, facebook.com/pointofviewradio.
You know, one of the things I do sometimes is speak on digital technology. You've got the book there, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. So we can hold that up there for somebody if they want to see. But when I do that, like at a Christian camp, what I find almost instantaneously is if somebody's on their phone, they see me coming, they're kind of like this, you know, because then like we can't talk about this at all. But Brent, I want to come to you for just a minute because you saw a 60 Minutes piece here that reminds us about what's happening to our brains. So educate us.
It's fascinating. Back in April, there was a report that was done by 60 Minutes that had to do with what's called brain hacking. And basically, they're talking to these people who are app developers and talking about how it's built into our social media today, this desire, their programming desire for people to want to open up the app and take a look. Mm-hmm. So you post a picture, hey, look at what my kids are doing or what my grandkids are doing, or the common, hey, look what I ate for lunch today. And yet people want to go back and check how many people liked it, how many people, clicked on it, how many people looked at it. They want to make sure that people saw that as a validation point. And what the report is talking about is how these developers are putting these tools within the app to try to cause people to check. They say that the typical person checks their phone every 15 minutes. And I find myself, and I'm just in terms of confession's good for the soul. I find sometimes I look at my phone for no reason at all. In fact, I'll look at, maybe to see if I have a text message or a phone call, something like that. But I'll find myself opening the phone, unlocking the phone itself just to look at the phone, and I have nothing I want to look at. I have nothing that I want to see.
I needed another reason to think you're weird. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
He says as he looks at his phone. But what these apps are doing is that they're hijacking people's minds, and we are willing participants in the process. We're getting involved in the process because we continue to post pictures, we continue to post our thoughts, our ideas, beliefs, and we want to see what people think about it. So they're creating a habit, and they say that it's almost like a slot machine.
Yes.
It's a desire for a reward, and that reward has no value whatsoever. Yeah. There is no actual value to the reward. You open up your picture, you see that somebody clicked on it and they liked it. Well, who cares? Who cares that they clicked on it and liked it? But we've created this idea in our mind, this image in ourselves that I have to be validated by other people. And the way that I'm validated is by somebody agreeing with what I'm saying. I think there's also a flip side to that, is that a lot of people are looking for arguments online. And so they're looking to put out something in order to stir the pot, to try to get people going. And I see so many people that want to argue on social media, and I just, like a truck backing up, I just start beeping and backing away from the conversation when I see
Well, I disagree
people
with you on that. I disagree completely with you.
I don't care.
I'm just kidding. But I think you are correct. I think it's really interesting. There was a study done by readcode.net, and it documented that on average, the American smartphone user has anywhere from 105 to 108, kind of the average number of apps on the phone, 105 to 108. Whereas you only use your top 5 apps. On average, you only use about 5 apps. And of those 5 apps, the commonality between those 5 apps is a connectivity kind of feature in it, in that there's a yearning for community also a yearning for validation. What kind of moves to your point? The 5 apps, think about the top 5 apps that you use. Is there a connectivity function to that allows you to be able to connect with other people on that? And that's one of the big pushes right now in app developers is they're trying to utilize and trying to build into their apps the connectivity function, because they know that if they can create a connectivity function, it can be more utilization from the user on the app, which again, I think just continues to point to an eternal echo in the midst of this desire to connect with one another. I think we're suffering time and time again. I think we're suffering from a loneliness epidemic here in the U.S. There's just individuals. We're decreasing in the amount of friends that we have. We're bowling alone, to use Robert Putnam's language. We are increasingly lonely. And what we're doing, though, is we're going onto Facebook, we're going onto these social media apps in order that we can find some type of affirmation or friendship, rather.
I think another question that some people should ask is, am I going to let everybody else manipulate me? Because as we just heard from Brent, a lot of this manipulation, they're figuring out, just like in a slot machine, what causes people to be addicted to gambling. We also recognize that the cigarette manufacturers now have to post full-page ads saying, yes, we really tried to addict you to cigarettes. And you think of another example. Let's talk about clickbait for just a minute.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, this is where you see something, they only tell you a little bit, and so it forces you to click on that and then find out there's really nothing there in the first place. And if there's anything that we've learned about the millennial generation, it's your generation that has been really pretty skeptical about how everybody's trying to manipulate me, everybody's trying to sell me, everybody's trying to promote their particular idea. So if there's something we could learn from the millennial generation, be a little bit more media wise about all of this.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things, Brent, like especially from a millennial standpoint. But I mean, I think you can extrapolate that onto any age demographic. There's this desire for transparency from others, but privacy for ourselves. Like we expect to know everything about everyone, but which is almost like which was the original temptation. You will be like God and know everything about everyone, and we want complete privacy for ourselves. We want to be selective with who we share our information with.
We want to be like God and know everything, and then we want to hide from God until He walks into the cool of our day.
Well said.
You know, I think that there's this, because there's this desire for more.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting because you talk about how many apps people use versus how many they have on their phone. I think that God has created us with almost a maximum capacity.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a certain amount of what we can process and what we can take in, and we see it in a lot of aspects of our lives. Most people go to the same restaurants. You know, most people don't say, we're going to try every restaurant in our city, unless you live in a town with a Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
You know, most people don't do that. They go to kind of the same thing. And when they go to that same restaurant, they eat the same food. They don't even have to look at the menu, although they'll look at the menu, ask the waitress, well, what do you like? What's best? And then they still order what they want, what they think is best. We sing the same songs in church. We tend to read the same books of the Bible when we're looking for something, or we quote the same Bible verses. And we also hang around the same people. They say that you're the sum of the 5 people you hang around with the most. And I think in many ways we are a society that's always wanting more, but we can't handle more. We have a capacity as to what we can take in, what we can process. And yet these social media, Facebook, these places are trying to get us to say, no, there's more out there. You've got to keep going. And that clickbait is out there to try to capture your attention, to try to pull you in.
Yeah, there's a hesitancy towards wanting to try new things, that we want to kind of stay in the home base and the comfort zone. I write this thing called the Daily Briefing, and in it, we just kind of overviewed the day's news. And 2 days ago, there was an article in New York Times that says why we're so prone to not want to try new things. And one of the fascinating statistics that they highlighted is that about 40 to 42% of our daily activities are habitual in nature, i.e., we do the same 42% if you look at 100% of our activities within a day, 42% are repeatable daily. Like, we are very habitual people. We do some of the same things. And for those of you that tune into the Point of View or read the Daily Briefing every day, thank you.
Because they'll be the return customers, right?
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
That's
and
right.
So what does that look like for us is, especially from a Facebook standpoint, it's going to be increasingly important for us to venture outside the kind of cocoon or the silo that just edifies our preconceived notions, but really try to challenge our minds to accept the invitation from our God that says, come and let us reason together. Let us argue with one another, but in a way that's beneficial, and in a way that's loving, and in a way that's gracious, that builds us up one with another. So we're going to continue talking about Facebook, and so you can call in and leave. We'd love to hear your point of view. You can call that number at 800-351-1212 or leave us a comment on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It was Friday night and the lights in Texas shone down on the field. The Coons High School football team was about to smash through a banner and onto the field. Holding the banner were the Coons High School cheerleaders. Negative slogans like "Beat the Bulldogs" were a thing of the past. These cheerleaders wanted to be positive, so they looked to the Bible for a positive message they could communicate instead. But the school said the new banner message had to go. They had received a complaint and could not afford to take any chances. But the cheerleaders were not about to give up. First Liberty Institute stepped in and for the next 5 years represented the young women. The school argued that since the banner was on school property, the message, chosen entirely by the students and displayed on paper the students purchased and painted, was government speech, and that couldn't be religious without violating the Constitution. The court disagreed. No reasonable person would conclude that the message, scrawled in student script and held aloft by students, could be an official message of the state. Instead, the student's message was private speech, entitled to the protections of the First Amendment. Matthews v. Coons Independent School District stands for the important principle that schools cannot censor, ban, or claim ownership to the private religious speech of its students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View for this last 9 minutes. I am Nick Pitts, and this is the Millennial Roundtable. I'm joined at the roundtable by Dr. Brent Taylor, pastor of First Baptist Church, Carrollton, Texas, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, as well as Kerby Anderson. And we are going to be taking some phone calls as well as sharing some of your Facebook comments as we talk about social media. And so what it's doing to us and what are some of the positive benefits as well as some of the detriments that we need to be aware of. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212, or you can log on to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio to share your comment. And so we're going to take one of those phone calls right now. We've got Haley in Texas. Haley, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Hey, Haley, what is your point of view?
Hi, I was just going to make a comment. I'm a millennial, I'm 25, and I got off Facebook about 6 months ago, and it was the best thing ever. At first, it was actually hard. It was difficult being on Facebook, trying to go to that app, and it wasn't there. But I'm really sensitive, and the political stuff going on there just made me mad and upset. All my friends are liberals, so it was for the best. But I actually got surprisingly negative feedback and still do. The Christian moms group I'm a part of, there's about 60 of us, and they asked at first, is everyone on Facebook? And I raised my hand, said I wasn't, and there are a couple kind of rude jokes made about not being on Facebook and being under a rock. And I just think it's pretty surprising. I've missed out on, like, you know, friend reunion get-togethers because I wasn't part of the Facebook group message. And so it does kind of touch on that idea that, you know, as a society, we feel like we're more included on Facebook, but in actuality, it doesn't seem to pan out that way in real life.
Yeah, Haley, I'd be really interested. So I live in a house, and there's 5 of us that live in this house together. And of the 5, 3 of them are not on Facebook either. They've kind of shunned social media. And so have you experienced some of those questions? Like, what are you trying to hide? What's the kind of ploy behind this? Because I know they experience a ton of those questions, especially being millennials. It's almost like an assumption that you have Facebook. And then there's more of, what are you doing? Why are you not on it? What are you trying? I didn't know if you were experiencing some of that.
Oh, yeah. I've had my husband, actually, he's on Facebook. He's 12 years older than me, but I had family ask me if he's the reason, you know, I deleted it, or people coming up with these crazy ideas why I got off, or like, were you being cyber bullied? And it's like, no, I made an adult decision. I felt like it was affecting me badly psychologically, and I was getting addicted to it. So, yeah, people come up with the craziest reasons why I'm off of it, but simply put, it's just not what I want to spend 6 hours a week on.
Wow. That's great. Thank you so much for calling in, Haley. I think that's very, I'm starting to hear more and more about this. I don't know if you are, Brent, this idea that people are just deciding that it's just too much. Like, I can't put the boundaries on it, or I don't even want to try to put the boundaries on it. I just want to completely remove it from my life. And it's just,
well, and I think a lot of people are struggling because there's only so much time in the day, and it's amazing. You start looking at Facebook and you look up and you've burned quite a bit of that time, and you're not any better than you were when you first started looking at it. And so it's funny because it's supposed to bring us all together, but it's somewhat isolated us. You know, I was mentioning during the break, I was talking about I went this summer. I have a friend who's an executive for Facebook, and I went there and spent the day and toured their campus, their facility. And what was striking to me is how very open and communal the place is. They really promote bringing people together, not just working at a desk and hiding behind, a cubicle wall, but people literally have places where they come out in the open. The cafeteria area is very much designed for people to sit in groups and to visit and talk together. We've seen Mark Zuckerberg going around the country having sit-down, face-to-face conversations with pastors, with business leaders, with all sorts of people across the country. So it's designed to, the thought is it's going to bring people together, but I think we see that people are spending a lot of time on it, and it's pulling them away from people, not necessarily connecting them with people.
What I think is so interesting, if people go to this article that you've posted, Nick, it is from a Facebook executive, and at the very end he says his children aren't allowed to use that, and he uses a word I won't use on the air, obviously, and he's actually preventing his own kids from using Facebook. Now, years ago, I remember talking to the religion reporter for ABC News, Peggy Waymeyer, and we were talking about something, and she said, well, my kids never watch my news. And I go, your kids do not watch you on the news? She says, no, I don't let any of my kids watch what I do for a living. Wow. And then you find out that Spielberg and some of the others don't let their kids see some of their movies. So when the people in the business are concerned about the impact on their kids, or as Brent points out, when the people in Facebook have more community than the people that are using Facebook, doesn't that tell you something about maybe how to reorder your life a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. Again, we'll continue to use this point, and kind of a favorite of ours is Jean Twenge. So Jean Twenge, in her research, it's very clear. She says in that book, in kind of her article in the Atlantic, that what it seems clear is that the more time individuals, or this iGen generation, looks at their screens, the less likely they are to be happy.
Yes.
And which is fascinating, especially when you think about just the happiness that's like moving away from these individuals, and or no longer would consider themselves to be happy. But then what's Facebook doing? Facebook just last week said that we're going to try to introduce Facebook Messenger for 6 to 12-year-olds in order that parents can kind of put some of those parental controls on it. And so I'd be really interested, Brent. Well, like, what are you telling your people that go to your church? Are you warning them? Are you trying to guide and shepherd them? what does that look like when it comes to Facebook and other social media platforms?
Well, kind of like the people you were talking about, Kerby. I don't let my children come to my church either. So
there you go. Yeah. And listen to your sermons or anything.
That's right. I don't let them listen to what's being said.
It's some of the great things to put me to bed at night.
Yes,
Keep on going.
hey, me as well. So, I think that people have to learn how to control their lives. They have to. It's self-control. It's a fruit of the Spirit, and we have to be willing to exercise that. I was laughing about my children, but one of the things that my middle daughter has done that I have great respect for her on this, because I've not done this myself, but she has gone through a social media fast. So instead of giving up food or something else, she gives up social media. And in the teenage realm, that's a pretty big step, because you're giving up something that is of value. It's a way of communicating, of staying connected. And yet she does that in order to be able to hear from the Lord. As believers, as Christians, a lot of the problems that we talk about on this program might be solved if more Christians spent less time looking at social media and more time looking at Jesus. It may be harder to read 2 books a week, but if you spend more time between now and Easter reading your Bible, it might make a difference in your life.
Yeah, I think it's
Nick.
one of those. I'm sorry. I'm only going to check Instagram 7 more times today. But I think you are right. Again, even though the Bible was written, some parts of it were written 2,000 years ago, what we continue to see is that it is the timeless truth of God, right? It's the double-edged sword. And so just to be cognizant of the fact that what Paul says in Ephesians 4, that the days are evil. And so we want to redeem the time that we have, of recognizing that when we're posting these things, there's a reason why James cautions us, though he didn't know about Twitter. He says to be slow to speak and be quick to listen and slow to anger, when Twitter seems to offer us a very alternative to that. And so just to be cognizant of just these biblical principles that really aren't calling us to move away from these, because again, Facebook really is becoming kind of cyber community square where public discourse can be had. But you also have the opportunity not to walk away from it, but to try to redeem that, to be that bright light, to speak that truth, but speak it in such a way that's gracious and hospitable and loving, in a way that would be befitting to the glory of our God and the good of your soul and the joy of this world.
And what would Jesus do on Facebook?
I think Jesus would.
He would not post Christmas shoes, I can tell you that.
Oh, he would. I think he loves that song. But this has been such a great time. Thank you so much for your phone calls, as well as for tuning in and leaving some of your comments on Facebook. We're so grateful. Brent, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Always a joy having you. Kerby, thank you so much for giving up the chair for a day for this Millennial Roundtable, and I am grateful for you all, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.